Howdy, folks. I'm Mark, and I am joined today once again by Jon Harrison, author of If Video Games Taught Me Anything. Welcome back, Jon. Thank you for joining me for this short talk about video games.
Absolutely.
Good to have you back. And everyone else out there, you are listening to Quick Play, so let's get right into it. I'd say I need to keep on doing this spiel every time, but you may have been confused when I said, hey, we're also doing this series on Game of the Decade, which is like, it's 2025. It's not a decade. What that means is it's Game of the Decade so far. So throughout this year, this is an ongoing series where I ask my guests, what's been your Game of the Decade so far? And it's a nice little checkpoint on games in the 2020s. It's also just a good excuse to talk about games we think are cool. So, Jon Harrison, what has been your Game of the Decade so far?
For me, it's been something some of you might have heard about, Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
Very nice.
We
will be here eventually.
The French JRPG.
Yes, like the JRPG. I've seen that a lot. There's another Pokemon pun that I can't remember now. Well, come back to me later. Well, excellent. I know this is a big deal one, and this is very topical, recent. It came out this year, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. In how you think about it, what is Clair Obscur about?
Okay, so I have to be careful here, right? Because there is so much potential for spoilers that,
sure.
Because the game is masterfully written. It has some of the best writing that I've come across in recent times, and I've played a lot of games, but it's got a really great story. So let's see, how do we talk about it without spoiling it? If you like Paris, if you like the French aesthetic, if that vibe is interesting to you, you're going to feel like you stepped into a literal painting of France, except a fantasy version of it. And what it's about, there is an expedition that occurs to stop a mysterious individual known as the Paintress. And in this world, individuals of a certain age, when they reach that age, essentially disappear. They call it gommaging, which I believe is the French word to, someone's going to check me on this, to erase or to vanish. Okay. And so essentially there's this number that's painted on a monolith by this paintress, and she repaints it every year. Every year it gets smaller. And so people of a certain age at that time of year, poof, they get, Thanos snapped out of existence. And so each year when this happens, they collect an expedition of people that say, instead of, turning into flower leaves and dust, we want to try to go and find out what's going on and stop this from happening. And so Expedition 33 references the age of 33. And this is a team of individuals getting ready to reach that milestone in their age that are going to try to figure out what's going on and how they can stop it. And that's where I probably have to stop talking about the story.
Sure. I want to circle back to the story in a very delicate, spoiler-free fashion. But first, for now, I think one thing I've heard a lot about this game is that it's kind of like if Square Enix just played it safe and kind of kept doing the JRPG thing, like traditional JRPG, instead of kind of going wild with Final Fantasy. Is that your take as well? What do you think?
I feel that this helps scratch the itch a lot of people are missing. So, I can't say that it follows the vein of Square Enix, right? Square Enix has a certain whimsy to it. It has a certain sort of fantastical element. They seem to, in a lot of the Final Fantasy series, which I love, they have a tendency to insert things that don't age well because they're just goofy for various reasons.
Yeah.
And this game is very much played straightforward. This is very much played. It's not without humor. It's got great humor, but it's very much like looking at the players saying, we know you're an adult that has discriminating taste. And so as I say this, I'm just reminded of characters that have a paintbrush instead of a head. And so I have to maybe double check that a bit on myself. But it's presented in a light that is a little more mature, but without kind of the we're so mature and edgy we have to drop the F-bomb every other sentence type of mature.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are the things you've appreciated about? Like, what do you like about Clair Obscur?
Well, I think it does really well the thing I love most about role playing games, which is it creates the sense of immersion. It creates a sense of mystery. The story draws you in, but at the
Mm.
same time, you feel that you have the luxury to explore a bit on your own. But unlike a lot of open world games, the narrative still is kind of keeping you on track a bit more. And so I really love the immersion factor, the character development. You have multiple characters in your party that build relationships over time. They have backstories, they have dialogue, and all of that, because of the writing being so good, is slowly revealed to you bit by bit. In fact, there will be a movie. The rights have already been sold. They're going
Oh,
to make a
wow.
movie based on the franchise. And I
Yeah,
think it'll translate really well
sure.
into a movie based on the story that's being told in the game.
Awesome. Um, that's I maybe I heard that. I'm trying to remember now. That's it feels obvious of like of the huge rise of video game adaptations of like let's take the newest hotness and make it next year's newest hotness. Uh, anything so gameplay wise, like what have you really enjoyed? Like I guess a lot of times it's fascinating to see how gameplay and story intersect, and this is such a strong story. Does the
Mhm.
gameplay match? Does it kind of how does it weave into that?
Yeah, it is a hybrid version of turn-based games. So if someone's played Final Fantasy 13, they're going to feel very much at home. And I know those in the franchise kind of, for a long time people have winced at 13. 13 was criticized a lot when it came out. That it was very much, on the rails and not
Mm-hmm.
as much open world and all that, too much action orientation.
Yeah.
But there's elements of the turn base that are designed to be interactive, right? They introduce a system of parries and dodge mechanics that, depending on your difficulty setting, can be forgiving or incredibly demanding. But it adds a more interactive element. And so while it is a fully turn-based RPG, it's not an action RPG. It does keep you involved in the action. And so I think that's something that I appreciate. I like the turn-based nature, where if I want to stop and think about my next move a bit, I can.
Yeah.
But don't worry, for those who like action, you're not just going to be able to like sit down, grab a thing of popcorn. It keeps you engaged.
Sure. It's not a menu game. It's there's stuff to do too.
Yeah, it's menu driven by
Right.
buttons
Sure.
oftentimes, as opposed to something you have to scroll through,
Ah,
which I appreciate.
that is nice. Kind of take
Yeah.
a little less friction there.
Right. Yeah. You get to map your different attacks. You get to build loadouts. The characters are very customizable, but as you unlock abilities through an action game style skill tree, so it's
Hmm.
learning a lot from that world. You're then able to map, depending on where you are in the game, a certain number of these to each of the buttons, and so you can kind of know when it's your turn rather than like using the confirm, confirm, confirm. You're able
Sure.
to actually select the move button that corresponds
Okay.
to the attack that you select. So it does have a little actiony element to it.
That's cool. The I mean, we just talked about on the previous episode of like I'm not a JRPG guy. Like
Mhm.
the more I hear about Clair Obscur, the more I'm like I could give it a try sometime. I'm not chomping at the bit yet, but I could get into it if the opportunity arose. Um, anything that you wish was different about it, of like any critiques you got of it so far?
Yeah, critiques of it. It's so here's the thing. It looks like a AAA game. It is not. It's I
Interesting.
think I've heard it referred to as a double A game.
Sure.
One of the things, the lore behind it, if you haven't yet heard, is that really Sandfall Interactive, the team behind it, is just a little bit larger than 30 people in terms
Yeah.
of their core team. Now, obviously, there are many more people involved in
Sure.
different capacities, but your core team is small in this regard, and the development cycle for it is just incredible to research and learn about. And it's just a bunch of fun stories of how the music and the storytelling and all that came together through, non-typical means, just people
Right.
loving what they're doing. So there are some things that aren't fully polished on it, right? And things that if you're used to playing AAA games, you might be willing to scoff at. It's an RPG, but there are elements of action games in there. So there are times that you'll be in an overworld or an exploration mode where maybe there's things like collision detection gets kind of wonky, or you feel like you're
Sure.
getting stuck into the textures. The one thing that I have as a gripe about it is it has platforming sections as mini games, which are
Yeah.
optional until you realize the platinum trophy on the PlayStation, anyways, depends
Mm.
on you completing all of them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's held me back from getting the platinum on it, because it's got some very unforgiving platforming sections sandwiched in
Mm.
the middle of all that RPG goodness.
Nice. I have heard that criticism a good bit, that the platforming is not to be desired. Uh, I did wanna circle back to the story here because I know the ending has been controversial.
Mhm.
Um, to avoid spoilers, kinda to frame the question as, like, did you like the ending or did you not like the ending?
So my undergraduate studies, my major was in psychology, my minor was in philosophy. So you got to know that
Okay.
to
Sure.
understand. Like, I appreciated both the endings as offered
Mhm.
because there's a lot to read into.
Sure.
There's a certain sense of melancholy about the entire story, and there's a certain sense of ethics and morals and values that come up. There's individuals that show some really positive quality traits, but also deal with the fact that there's very much real trauma in the world, and that people don't always deal with it in the best ways. And our choices don't affect us alone. And so I
Mm.
think the endings play into that, this idea
Mhm.
that our choices are not insulated, and we have to wrestle with, is what I want, what's best for me, is what I want, what's
Mm.
best for everyone. And who gets to decide what's best, right?
Sure.
And so this story definitely wrestles with that throughout from the very beginning. It's giving you food for thought about this world that's lived in, that there's a lot of tough choices that have to go on. I mean, just
Yeah.
imagine if you are, and this is, kind of the thing wrestled with in the world, if you know you're only going to live to 33, how likely are you going to want to have children and bring them into a
Mm.
world knowing that at 33 you're gone? Right.
Sure.
So
Right.
those are the sort of things that come up, not your
Yeah.
typical video game, you know,
Yeah.
conversations, but that's all part of this world that's presented in the game. The storytelling, again, I've said it a lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully, no one will make a drinking game of using the word storytelling because you're in trouble. But it really tackles
Nice
that in a
wine.
way that I think is just fantastic to be a
Yeah.
part of an experience.
Okay. That's cool. I enjoy that. That is more promising than what I've previously heard about the ending was like people are mad about it, they don't like it, and so I think that's a little more encouraging about it. At least it's something to wrestle through and think about.
Right. Well, but here's the thing: if the ending is controversial to people, no offense, they probably weren't paying enough attention to everything else that happened
Mm.
along the way,
Hmm.
because there are several other major story points that you encounter that are as equally confounding and equally dilemma driven, that you
Yeah.
kind of just sit there like, whoa, this is heavy. This hits hard,
Yeah.
and they really do. They really do.
Interesting. Well, we've kind of like talked a lot around this already, but like kind of what makes this so special? Like why is it the game of the decade so far for you?
I would have to say it does something that a lot of the other games are tempted by and they fall into, and this game refused to do. Sure, there's side quests. Sure, there's bonus content, but this game is an exercise in restraint, because
Hmm.
you can actually play through a game that given a different developer or a different studio, it could have ballooned into, like an Elden Ring style game where you got 200 hours into it plus, and they kept it focused and tight, and they didn't tell the whole story. They left a lot unanswered in a way that's not feeling cheated. It feels like you had a segment that was great, but I feel like there's more of the story to tell, and I hope we get to see it told in a similar way. And so whether it's in
Mm.
in the movies, whether it's in sequel games, what the format that takes, I don't know. But I think what's made this game so good is it's very satisfying because it didn't overstay its welcome.
Hmm.
And I absolutely loved God of War Ragnarok. It was a contender for me, but that game was like two games. And I got
Right.
to a point playing through that I wanted to do everything. I did platinum it, but you know what? It could have been 2 games, and I would have paid for each half
Sure.
because it
Yeah.
felt so big. And
Yeah.
Clair Obscur does a much better job of staying focused on what it's there to do, and that's what I think makes it such a great example of a wonderful game.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I think I was thinking too, is there's the more budget price to it as well to kind of match that. And
Yeah.
as overall, that's a nice package with between content and price. It works well. And nice to see kind of a smaller scope be so significant in this day and age.
Yeah.
Do you think in 2030, end of the decade, this will still be your game of the decade, or do you expect something more?
This franchise might still be my franchise of the decade.
Sure.
If
Okay.
if they follow up to this at an equal level, if they just do another of what they did with this,
Yeah.
to me, this is a new bar when it comes to where I am at. So, okay, fair enough, though. Full disclosure, a week before I got the game, I had just returned from my first trip ever to Paris.
Oh, nice.
So,
You were primed.
I was primed and ready for
Yeah.
it, right? I already knew the swear words in French from being in France. So, by the way, the
Yeah.
game is in English, but they do teach you a lot of French. You'll pick up French along the way.
Nice.
Turn the subtitles on. It's fun.
There you go. That's something that video games will teach you. It's French. Um, that also, I like you kind of saying that. I've realized, like, because of the smaller scope, like we could get a sequel within this decade, which is wild to think about. Because usually games take so much longer. Do you think would it be named Expedition 34 or Expedition 32?
I can't spoil the story. I would say what's going to be persistent in my guess with the storytelling is that you're going to see a Clair Obscur game without an expedition number tied to it before you see one with an expedition number tied to it. But
Okay.
there are still other expedition stories to tell.
Interesting.
But I think there's room for a larger world beyond the expedition component of this story, because there's a lot more there. There's stuff that happens before for hundreds of years and conceivably after.
Nice. That'll be interesting to see this world expanded. Before we hop off of Clair Obscur, I remember the 2 puns. One I also saw was Je Suikoden was one.
Okay.
The Pokemon one that I thought was hilarious was one I made up, which is why I think it's hilarious, but I called it a Pokemon of me.
Okay. All right.
So it's a little stretch, but I'm proud of that one. So Clair Obscur came out 2025. Do you have another game that you got into this decade that is kind of like your game of the decade in your heart, even if it didn't come out in the 2020s?
Yeah. So I love this question. This one was right actually under, not under the wire. Under the wire would have mean it made it. It
Sure.
didn't make the cut just barely. It came out in 2019.
Okay.
But I think what you're going to run into with a lot of this question is what was a person's pandemic game, right?
Yeah, that's great.
And for a lot of people, that's like Animal Crossing. For me, it was the pandemic game, Death Stranding.
Oh, okay.
Where, and I played that game, I don't know how many 100+ hours during, lockdown. And it became part of a routine. That'd be my early morning before I started work remotely. I would get up and I would put in some time with Death Stranding. And that was one that I was doing all the side quests like the whole way through. Like I was just doing a slow burn through it because no one knew how long it would take. So I didn't feel the need to rush through.
Sure.
Which if you played that game today, my advice to you would be different.
Sure.
My advice would be rush through the story until the game makes sense for it to be easier to do the things that were hard when you started. That's my non-spoiler version of do that. Because the game has some interesting storytelling, but it unfolds differently. But that was the game I was playing for a lot of the pandemic, and that was one that came out in 2019, right at the end. It felt appropriately bleak and uncertain. It's very post-apocalyptic. And, some people have talked about you're essentially a Amazon package delivery guy for the game. So it felt like it kind of, like I'm taking someone their groceries, right? It felt very much of the time. And the soundtrack is fantastic. That introduced me to the band Low Roar. which has become one of my favorites. Sadly, their lead frontman Ryan passed away just about a year ago. They, at the age of 40, right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow's not promised to us.
Yeah.
But it introduced me to their work, and the game still had a lasting impact. As evidenced by the sequel to it is loaded on my hard drive, just not yet played.
Right.
I'm waiting for the right time to be able to mosey through rather than try to speed run that game.
Sure. The next time we had a world pausing pandemic, is when we get into Death Stranding 2. Not that we're wishing for that.
Let's not do that.
Let's not bring that into. Let's not try to manifest that. Sooner. I was just talking about this. Death Stranding is one I haven't tried, but it's also like I don't know if I would completely bounce off or be totally into it. And it's a total 50-50 toss up of my personality for it. Well, our time is short here, but before we go, what is one hope you have for the rest of the decade around video games?
Around the rest of the decade, I love seeing the variety still. My hope, as much as I love generative AI as a tool, my hope is that AI minds its own business and stays out of games in ways that it should stay out.
Sure.
Bring it in for where you need it. Yeah. It's a great tool for certain things, for things that are boring and that don't require human ingenuity, creativity. That's fine. But when it comes to things like, maybe the voice acting components to it, let's hire voice actors for that. There's, I don't care how good it sounds. I want a real person behind these lines, especially we have such great talent out there. When it comes to a lot of the design and things like that, like let's keep that human. Let's make our games human, but use AI for the boring stuff that no one should have to do, that we all hate. And so my hope would be is that I know that's not going to be the case right away. I know at first it's more likely to be like, here's the first AI completely generated game. But I hope that we find a good balance for allowing games to be an expression of human art, because there's so many great stories to tell. The games that have meant the most to me tell a great story and have a great story behind them. And that's the story of, even why my book came up, because of the people. It's not just the games. It's how do we as people interact with this art form? How does it change us? How does it encourage us to think and interact with others? And so I hope to see games preserve that, because I believe games do it better than books, movies, or any other type of media. So that's my hope.
That's great. Good stuff. Well, we can wrap up now. But before we go, one name, one game. What are you playing now? You can take a guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say with hope and optimism, I'm playing Death Stranding 2. I just need to start.
Excellent. I'm going to say, I'm trying to think of when this will go out. I hope I can be checking out that Kirby Air Riders demo they just announced. So hopefully around there, I'll be playing that. Well, John, thank you for joining me for a Game of the Decade conversation too. Where else are you out on the internet?
You can find me at jondharrison.com. That's kind of where all the other stuff lives. And that's John without the H, Jon.
Excellent. And if you're tuning into this one and haven't checked out the previous episode on John's new book, If Video Games Taught Me Anything, check out John's new book, If Video Games Taught Me Anything. I'll leave all the links in the description. There you go. It's popping up. Well, thank you again for joining me. Thank you all for listening in. You can follow us on the major podcasting services or on YouTube. You can press all the good buttons if you enjoyed this conversation. And you can find us on the proper socials at Quick Play Pod and let us know, is Clair Obscur Expedition 33 the game of the decade? That's all the time we have for today. Thanks. Bye.